Thanks. TEC15 announcements. Hello. Good afternoon. I said hello. Good afternoon. Great. Remember this morning, Michael mentioned that we had a global audience. Do you remember? So we're having another of those sessions where we're going to meet the world, okay? So what I want you to do this time is I want you to face the camera, wave, and say, hello, world. But you've got to look at the world. The world is over there. Okay? Hello, world. Seems like we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to drilling. I think we've got a little bit of work to do there. Anyway, so one or two announcements. Firstly, this is what's going to happen this afternoon. Okay? Remember what John Lennon said, if you want to make God laugh, tell him what your plans are. But this is what we intend to do this afternoon. And at 5 o'clock, you have some marvelous choices to make. Can you see that? Those are the workshops that are going to take place at 5 o'clock. Now, you can find the ones in black in your program on pages 29 to 31. The new one that's not in the program is in room 102, which is an English in Action presentation by Rama Matthew and her colleagues from Bangladesh. Has anyone heard of English in Action? Yes? Because by 2017, they will have reached 75,000 teachers and 14 million students all over Bangladesh. So if you wanted to find out more about that, you go to room 102. If you want any of the other things, you go to those rooms. And for GO4, top tips, multiple choice questions, A, you go yourself, B, you send your friend, C, you video it, or D, you do all three, okay? So that's GO4, right. So, we've got the panel discussion now. So 1, 2, 3, ooh. Okay, thank you. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Rittika, who is the chair of the panel. And Rittika has a varied background, and she told me that she was a teacher for 6 years before she moved into administration. And what she likes about her current job is that she still spends time with children and teachers. She's very happy with her job. And it's my great pleasure to invite Rittika to come on the stage, and she's going to introduce the panelists. So a warm round of applause for Rittika. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from many interesting sessions. We have with us a very varied panel with different skill sets, different experiences. And it's my great pleasure to welcome up on stage Colin Bangay, Maya Menon, Lina Mukhopadhyay, and Amol Padwad to join us. And as they come, I'll introduce them to you. Colin is the DfiD's India Senior Education Advisor. He's worked extensively throughout Africa and Asia as teacher, researcher, consultant, and resident program manager. Previous to his present position, he was the Senior Education Advisor in DfiD, headquarters in London. He spent 2 years as lecturer at the World Bank Institute in Washington, D.C., working on issues of quality, teacher education, decentralization, non-state provision. His most published work covers a range of topics from non-state education provisions to education responses to climate change and education and disaster risk management. So welcome, Colin. Maya is the founder, director of Teacher Foundation, a Bangalore organization that's deeply involved in designing and delivering intensive programs that span the whole school improvement interventions, as well as in-service and continuing professional development of teachers and school leaders for a range of schools, private and government. She has been in the field of education for 30 years. Her interests include teacher effectiveness research and whole school improvement, teacher development, collaborative approaches to teaching and learning, interpersonal communications in classroom, leadership, and strategic management. And we will hear her inputs shortly in this panel discussion. Welcome, Maya, and thank you for being with us. We have Lina Mukhopadhyay, who teaches at the Department of Materials Development and Education at the EFLU University, Hyderabad. Her areas of academic interest are second language acquisition, language assessment and literacy, bi-multilingual education, and academic writing. So we're very happy to have Lina with us, and she will also talk to us shortly. Amol Padwad is currently the head Department of English, J.M. Patel College, Bandara, and he has taught for 30 years at different levels. He's the national convener of IATFL, an all-India network of English teachers, AINET, an academic counselor for EFLU, Hyderabad, and a teacher trainer and ELT consultant. He has several articles, reviews, and translation projects to his credit. So there, ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for the panel, whom we shall hear very shortly. So inevitably in India, we come to a point where we talk about improving things, and then we come to the discussion of how the quantity of the task at hand, the enormousness of the task at hand, can we ever move away from quantity to looking at quality, and what implications does it have for teacher education? We hope that the panel members and the discussions that follow will tell us whether quality and quantity are really at war with one another, or is there a happy middle ground that we can find that meets the urgent requirement of young people in our classrooms and those who are going to come through the system shortly, or are we doomed to having low-quality teaching in schools? And I'm sure the situation is not dismal, but we'll look for answers shortly from the panel. And without much delay, because we have such a short duration to listen to everybody, may I request Lina to come and tell us a bit from her perspective as a member of the EFLU Materials Development Department, how the teacher educator's perspective on how we can move away from quantity towards quality. Thank you.
Thank you, Rittika. I'm going to make some observations in relation to the Indian context and English language teacher education in the Indian context. However, I'm aware that we have a global audience, and I think as an academician and as a researcher that many of the observations that I make would be equally valid for other non-English speaking ESL, EFL contexts. The implementation of the Right to Education Act in 2009 in India has resulted in an increase in the number of ELT teachers working in primary and secondary schools. But our teachers most often are not adequately trained or given enough opportunity to communicate in the target language, and even if they try to, their capability is judged and often quantified as the number of errors, especially those in syntax or grammar. So to explore ideas on quality in teacher education, I would like to make 2 points in my presentation. One is, teacher educators should encourage teacher trainees to communicate freely or use expressive talk, that is, talk about their learning experiences, development, involvement, motivation, and so on to their peers in English. When teachers engage in such expressive talk, they are likely to attain higher levels of fluency in the target language. And if English teachers can have a working level of fluency in English or are able to use the language well, then they will not feel that they are dealing with something alien or be forced to using only course books or grammar rules while teaching. Alongside, it would boost their confidence as a professional who is in charge of what he or she is doing, like any of the subject teachers. Thus, I feel if language teachers become good users of the language, they can be a rich resource from whom their learners can pick up English like many of us have done during our school days. The second point I wish to make on imparting quality teacher education is that our teachers should be trained and advised to practice such expressive talk with their learners in classroom, because the classroom is a primary site of ESL learning in majority of the Indian schools, like I suppose in many of other non-English speaking countries. Teachers can be trained to utilize multilingual resources of children, and I'm talking about multilingual resources in the context of India, and they can practice bilingual expressive talk starting with learners L1 or their home language and gradually make a shift to using English. The transition has to be natural and at a pace the learners are comfortable with. So the bilingual method will be situation specific, and its success will largely depend on the ability of the teacher to exploit the multilingual resources her learners bring to the class. Student expressive talk will give the teacher a real assessment of the learning that has taken place. The learners in turn will gain confidence that they are using the second language to learn something in real life and feel encouraged to communicate in English. The teacher, of course, must be alert to the instances of learning and acknowledge and appreciate individual and collective learner efforts. So I would like to conclude my presentation by saying that the National Curriculum Framework for Teacher Education envisions teacher education and school education as having a symbiotic relationship, and that development in both the sectors would ensure quality in the entire spectrum of education. So, one way of practicing quality in education would be to take this symbiotic relationship forward by striking a balance. On one hand, encourage our teachers to become fluent in the target language, and on the other, give them the training to help learners get quality education in English such that the learners are able to use English according to their real life needs and not to cater to some broader native speaker standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina. May I now request Maya to give us her input?
Thank you, Rittika. I'm going to use this platform just to make a case. It says we need to look at moving from quantity to quality. I'm making a case for considering both quantity and quality rather than moving from quantity to quality. Why? Because I'd like to give you a few quick facts. One is we have over 1.5 million schools in our country, of which nearly 1.3 million schools are in rural India. We have as many as 448 million students or children who are under 18, and we have 7 million teachers, which means that there's a student-teacher ratio of about 64:1. I'm conscious I'm telling you India figures, of course. We are an international audience. The delegates are from other neighboring countries. But that's the problem. And apart from that, so we have big concerns. We have concerns, Rod Balaito referred to it in the morning, we have concerns about quality, we have concerns about shortage of teachers, we have poorly trained teachers, we have poorly trained teacher educators. The image of and status of the teacher is rather poor, is usually a very sort of dull, stodgy sort of image that the teacher has of a person who teaches subjects rather than students or people. Salary is always an issue. Rod Balaito referred to it, but my question is often in terms of will better salaries encourage better teaching, or will better, more professional teachers and teaching command better salaries. So that's the dilemma, the whole dilemma between quantity and quality. We have an outdated teacher education curriculum. We have sadly, and I say it bluntly, but we have sadly uninspiring teacher educators, barring a few exceptions. Most of the teacher educators are not themselves in touch with schoolgoers, with children. If you're not in touch with children, you are a little removed from what happens in the classroom. And sadly, to aggravate the whole issue, we also have a lack of vision. There's no clear urgency to work on this on a nationwide footing. It has to be a war footing to look at improving and upgrading our teachers and teaching. And we also have, sadly, and I say that as an Indian, we have a national tendency to take shortcuts. So we take shortcuts, we try to make do with minimal effort, etc. So that's where we are. Now, what's the way forward? Because I don't want to use this platform just to say what's all wrong with teacher education. We need to, first of all, get our priorities right. I make a big case for having more alternative teacher certification courses. It's something I've been talking about at various public fora and conference platforms. Alongside mainstream teacher education, colleges of teacher education, etc., we need to have alternative teacher certifications like there are in other countries. We need to attract average young or older person to take teaching as a career. And I emphasize average and not excellent, not the brightest, because there is this big move of trying to attract the brightest in the profession, but India is too big a country and we need far more people to come into teaching. And something that requires long-term success, something as vital as education that requires long-term success, we need to have, we need to focus on the excellence of the average rather than the brilliance of a few. So what do we do? What do I do? The organization I'm with, the Teacher Foundation, we try and do some things, and I can talk about it later, it's not to promote it. We've done an alternative teacher certification course of 1,000 hours, which has about 300 hours of school internship, which has been quite rigorous. It's a pilot, we've just completed the pilot, and we've been amazed at how successful it has been in terms, and it actually caters to people who will teach in lower-end private schools. So it's actually reaching out to less privileged children. We're also going to the other end of the spectrum, and we're looking at an online teacher certification course where young people or trainees can then get a teaching license, which is recognized in the US. And in between, we're also looking at having enrichment programs for college B.Ed lecturers, teacher trainers, etc., as an intensive program with a lot of college-based support, as well as enrichment programs and electives for students who are already B.Ed trainees in respective colleges of teacher education. So we really need to look at actually having multi-pronged attempt at improving quality while we foster the quantity. So what are the implications in terms of teacher accreditation? I'm very aware and very conscious of the fact that you can't just run an alternative teacher certification course. I make a bid for, if we are looking, India needs so many more teachers, we should allow alternative teacher certification courses to blossom, but have a very rigorous school internship program, and have strengthen the teacher eligibility test so that anybody going through any course, if they go through and satisfy and clear the teacher eligibility test, they should be given a qualified teacher status. Now, that has implications for having really good teaching schools who can mentor and handhold trainee interns and people who are aspiring to be teachers. So there's another implication of having training really good mentors in different schools. And we need to have a sound career management course for teachers, trainees, so that any trainee who's aspiring to be a teacher needs to know what can I do once I become a teacher? What are the routes for further growth and development and continuing professional development? And lastly, the teacher must be aware of what are the standards towards which I can actually work as a professional. Teacher standards. We in India, we still don't have a well-articulated teacher standards, which every teacher in the country knows, every practicing teacher as well as every aspiring teacher. So these are some of my, you may say, recommendations for looking at the whole dilemma of quantity versus quality. I certainly believe that we need to look at both. Thank you.
So thank you, Maya and Lina, for your perspective from a practitioner. I really like the idea where you've looked at, let's see how many people, through the eligibility test, through internship, have the skills and the qualifications to teach and get them into schools to teaching, because we really can't afford to go through a longer system. We need more teachers quickly. We could get that there. It wasn't a question. It was just
comment. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Rittika.
But I like that idea in a sense. Yeah. So we now have Colin, who has the perspective, can give us the international perspective from the research, international research on teacher training. What are the systems that work? What doesn't work? Where can we learn from? And what are the possible ways to get ahead with solving this puzzle of quality and quantity? So, Colin.
Thank you. Well, I think the first thing to note is the international research is absolutely unanimous to say that the most likely way to improve student performance is to improve the quality of teaching. And just to say that you guys are really important, and from what I've seen in the sessions today, you're at the vanguard of that effort. So what does the research tell us? So I'm going to pick three things around dead ends and some things that seem to work. And some of these might be surprising for you. So the first thing, things that don't seem to make a big difference when you look at studies. First thing is upgrading certification has not tended to improve the quality of teaching as measured by student learning. So having more and more certificates doesn't necessarily improve learning. The second thing is teaching ability is not, the international research tells us, closely related to training or experience. That's not to say it isn't, but not closely related. Issues of motivation, morale, and teacher expectations of their students are really significant. And the third point is, from an analytical viewpoint, it is incredibly difficult to sort out the quality of the teacher from the quality of the student that they have in their classes. And that has big implications. Many people advocate using business models and having performance-related pay. Now that's very difficult for teaching because it's difficult to separate out how good the teacher is and how good the student is. A student in a CBSE school is much more likely to do well in examinations than a school in rural Bihar. But that does not mean the teacher in the CBS school is better than the teacher in the school in rural Bihar. They're the things that don't seem to make a big difference. So what does make a big difference? Well, a big study done in New Zealand came out with the quality of teaching and learning improves fastest when teachers learn from and with other teachers. A quality-assured CPD model based on in-class coaching and modelling is more effective than one based on attending courses. So the kinds of things that you're doing, are certainly the session I've just been to, where people were really interactive with other practitioners, is shown to make a big difference. So I'd just like to, there's a very interesting researcher called Andy Hargreaves who's done a lot of work on teaching, and he's got this conceptual map for the stages of or ages of teaching. And I'd like you, I know it's an international audience, I'm going to read out his stages, and I'd like you to think and try and place where your country fits into this conceptual map. So he calls the first age the pre-professional age. And that's an age of one-off college-based training, a fixed concept. Once you're trained, you apply your training for the rest of your teaching life, and you replicate the way you were taught. The second age is the professional autonomy. Teaching gets a knowledge base, but that knowledge base is held in higher education institutions and teacher training colleges, and pre-service and in-service are separated. The third age he calls the professional community. Teaching and knowledge is collectively owned. Teachers learn from each other in schools, and boundaries begin to erode. The emphasis being on teachers learning from each other in schools. And the fourth age is teacher education increasingly is decentralized. So teacher education doesn't happen in teacher training colleges, it happens in schools. Continuous and lifelong, seamless pre-service and in-service, an emphasis on teacher accountability derived through assessment and national standards. So I'll share this conceptual map with the organisers, and maybe as you go through your profession as teachers, you might want to try and map where your teacher system actually sits within that, with that useful conceptual model. I think there are, just to end on that, to create some of these good practices, I think we often focus on the pedagogy, but we pay less attention to the prerequisites. What kind of things do we need to make an environment that's conducive to this? So I'm going to give you three things I think that are really important. The first one is school leadership. If schools are going to be centres of learning for teachers, then we need leaders who can not only lead the school administratively, but have instructional leadership within them. The second is CPD, which has individuals take responsibility for their own learning. So CPD is not given to them, but they actively seek it out and shape it. So they become guided learners themselves. And the third thing is a career path, a path where training, growth is actually rewarded and enables you to progress through the system. So in terms of international research and in terms of things to think about, I think this Andy Hargreaves conceptual map is a really interesting one to help you frame your teaching in a broader context. And I think that's exactly what needs to be done if we start to move the whole system, not just individual classrooms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. We'll do Amol first? Yeah? So we have our last panel member, Amol, and we'll listen to his inputs before we get into the question and answers session. And we'll make a little bit of announcement for that as we come to that point. Yes.
Thank you. It was very interesting to hear three different dimensions about the whole issue, and I would like to add a fourth one to it, though all these are related to each other. Colin mentioned CPD, and I think I would continue in the same vein. The issue of quantity and quality, and we are actually looking at quality now. Quantity itself is a paradoxical problem in India. Considering my own state, Maharashtra, we have a very interesting situation there. The quantity of qualified teachers is not enough. We are short of well-trained qualified teachers, but at the same time, going by the last year's figure, there are 71,000 pass-outs from teacher training institutes who are without any job. So this is a very tricky situation, but let's forget that quantity part. Let's theoretically assume that we have enough quantity. What about the quality of that quantity? We often believe that quality, once established, serves us for the lifetime. Suppose we have an excellent pre-service program, excellent initial teacher education program. We have wonderful B.Ed and D.Ed colleges which have produced high-quality teachers. So at the time they enter schools, they are extremely well-trained and qualified. The quality is assured at the time of entry. But does it mean that that quality continues throughout their careers? Quality is a process that goes on and on. I personally believe that teachers' professional development and their quality are almost synonymous. So, do we see teachers continuously updating themselves, continuing to learn and being professional throughout their careers? For every person sitting in this room, there are at least 10,000 who have not come to any conference in their lives. For every teacher who reads a pedagogical research article or a book, there are 10,000 who have never touched any printed page. For every teacher who has shown some sort of new kind of learning, there are 10,000 who have not. This means, in a broader term, that we have failed to create a culture of professionalism. Quality is something that does not happen in isolation. Quality is something that does not happen one by one individually. It's a huge culture, it's the whole culture. I believe that there are several reasons for this, but two reasons I would like to pick out. One, we still work with a very narrow view of teacher development and teacher quality. I'm specifically speaking about teachers who are already into the profession. The National Curricular Framework for Teacher Education in 2010 started mentioning the term CPD. Until then, they did not even mention the word CPD, they mentioned only in-service training. And while this new latest curricular framework talks about continuing professional development, if you read all the provisions, you get a feeling that in spirit, they are still limited primarily to in-service teacher training. In other words, we are restricting development only to some aspects. We still don't recognize in our policies and provision the importance of offering multiple channels of development to teachers, supporting them with all possible help, and also allowing them, teachers, to have some autonomy, some choice, some individuality, some personalization in the developmental process. So that is one issue. And the second issue is we still don't have that combination where support is available from above and some initiative is built up from below. Once again, this becomes the issue of the culture of professionalism. And I believe if we are really thinking of quality, then we must remember that quality is a product of a particular professional culture, and that professional culture itself is a product of collective thinking and collective commitment. So it's a huge and challenging task. I don't want to be pessimistic on that count, because the number of people sitting in this room, that number itself gives us a lot of hope. The number of conferences and events and seminars happening in India still has a lot of hope. And the number of people, individuals, a huge number of individuals who are battling this fight of quality alone, often isolated from each other, but still a significant number, all this still has some hope. But we must remember that these isolated individual examples will not lead us to a global overall impact on teaching profession in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amol. I'm sure that a lot of you in the audience would have identified with much of the things that our panel members said. I'm sure that some of it you would have felt, perhaps that wasn't what I was thinking. And I'm sure that in a lot of your heads, there are lots of questions on the boil that you need to get out really quickly. But the way we want to do our questions today, because I look at the vast sea of faces of teacher educators in front of me, and it worries me that if everyone's question were to be answered, we wouldn't get any dinner or not get back to our flights and back home again. So we've thought of a way of getting around this problem so that we are able to hear every voice in the room and not the one that was waving their hands loud, you know, the highest mic for me kind of a thing. So we are going to ask you to take the next 2 minutes as we sum up the conversation here, to think about your questions, take a piece of paper from your notebooks and write down that question. When you're writing down your question, please also write your name and who you are. And if you have a preferred panelist whom you would like to address that question to, you might want to add that as well. Once you've got the questions written down, we have a number of volunteers. Where are the volunteers, please? So can you come forward and wave your hands, ladies and gentlemen? So if you wave your piece of paper on which you have the questions written, they'll collect it from you and get it to us. And the thing is, we wouldn't, I'm sure, be able to respond to all the questions immediately, but we would answer some of them. And those that we can't get to answer right away, we try and take time to collate them and share them with you and answer them post the conference, so that we really don't end on Sunday and we have still something to anticipate and look forward to. But, you know, listening to our panel members, I think we had the good news and the bad news in a sense. So the bad news was that training and experience is not equal to quality in most cases. And the good news is that, you know, all responsibility for improvement of teacher education does not lie with the teacher educators. A few want some burden off our shoulders in that sense. But in case, you know, so any one of you could sort of help me with answering that question. In case teacher educators are not the only people responsible for improving quality, what do you see, Amol sir, as the kind of role of teacher educators in this? How would it change? What implication would this new world be for them, where they have to create a system where teachers are learning from each other?
Well, I do agree with you. I do agree with you that the responsibility of ensuring teacher quality doesn't lie with teacher educators alone. But teacher educators are seen as an important bridge between theory and practice, because they are expected to prepare teachers. And when they are preparing teachers, on the one hand, they are providing teachers with an overview of whatever happened in the past in terms of research, in terms of theory, so that teachers are well prepared with conceptual frameworks to get into the profession. And on the other hand, they constantly expose teachers to the practice, to the ground reality, so that teachers also have an idea of what sort of ground they are going to enter. So this kind of link or bridge, that is teacher educators' responsibility, I believe. I take this opportunity to mention a point close to my heart, which was mentioned in the morning as well. In India, I personally believe, and it may sound a bit provocative, but I personally believe that India still does not have a cadre called teacher educators. We only have some teachers accidentally slipping into the label of teacher educators, but we don't have a whole system and mechanism and curriculum and policies and institutions for teacher educators.
Yeah, to add to Amol's statement, I think, like he said, that we still do not have teacher educators as a cadre in India to take that a bit forward. If we could think of a situation where teacher trainees could form smaller groups and they could give each other feedback, critical feedback, and probably analyze each other's sessions, though I really don't know how they would do that beyond their training program. But if we could have such a system that a group of teachers are inducted in the same school or in the same institution and they continue as a group, then I suppose the training that they get from the program or the teacher educators, they can take it forward. But I really don't know if this is kind of a wishful thinking, but what I am talking about is kind of forming a good peer group where things are more transparent and they can keep learning from each other rather than thinking that it is an isolated profession and I continue to work like an island.
So we have some questions coming up. Can we have the volunteers bring up the sheets of questions? So of course, questions with the best handwriting will be answered first. It says, how can, this question is from Suresh Kumar, UMS Bihar, and he asks, how can the quality of teachers be improved? As you said, quality doesn't happen in isolation. So this is the question that you were responding to in a sense. So I think the panel is reflecting some of the questions that you have. So I was just going to take that question to maybe Maya and Colin to say, you've said that teacher-to-teacher learning is probably the best. Maya, do you have any examples of where this has happened? Do you have teacher clubs or clusters? Do we have some evidence of how this has worked somewhere?
Yeah, I just want to, is this working? I just want to say, I think there is an important role for, in initial teacher education, there is definitely an important role for teacher educators. So let's not, absolve teacher educators of the responsibility of ensuring quality of people who go into the teaching profession. But after you become a teacher, once you're in service, I think there's a lot of peer learning. And I think technology becomes a big boost for that. We have a very active Facebook site where we use social media to network with teachers, and e-groups, of course. And then, of course, a lot of peer learning within institutions, across institutions can happen also. So I think a lot of peer learning happens because one good idea gets infected. It's like using Rod Balaito's bug idea. It's so easy to infect another teacher with a good idea. In the same way as it's so easy to infect a teacher with a bad idea or bad practice. So I think if we can look at infecting teachers with good ideas, I think that's tremendous. And there's a lot of peer learning that's possible and that we have seen as evidence too.
Okay, so I think the key point is to understand when you teacher educators, anybody who educates a teacher, be that a teacher or somebody in a higher education student, is still a teacher educator. We're all teacher educators. So I think one of Hargreaves' points is the boundaries start to merge. And the key point is that there's not a monopoly of understanding of teaching in higher educations and teacher education institutions. I think that's what he's really driving at. And I think that's what the research is also showing. I think the second point to consider is no one in their right mind would come to me and ask me to teach them how to make curry, because I just don't have the expertise to do that. Similarly, if you're a teacher educator in a teacher education institution, you have to be able to demonstrate the ability to hold a class and to motivate a class and to generate a class. And that doesn't just mean a class of teachers. You have to be able to do that with a class of students, perhaps in conditions where the materials are not there. So it's like riding a bicycle. You may know all the theory, but you have to be able to practice it. And to be credible with your teacher education students, you need to be able to demonstrate that credibility to them. So I think there's a real danger in teacher education, and it was certainly seen in the UK, is that teacher educators became isolated from the classroom realities. And they were talking huge amounts of theory and didn't actually understand the conditions into which teacher trainees were going into. So which is why I think it's about teamwork. It's about smudging those boundaries. It's about recognizing that learning doesn't just happen in higher education institutions, particularly in teaching, which is a practical skill as well as an academic discipline.
Thank you, Colin. There's a question here, which is one that sort of, people always tout as an answer to anything that, talks about quantity, which is how can technology address the issue of quality and quantity together, bring that together. So do you feel, if anybody would like to sort of respond to the role of technology in teacher education?
So on that one, I would just advise you to all go and see the English in Action presentation. So, because that's exactly what that does. In simple economic terms, if you use technology, you can spend a lot of money on very high-end presentational materials, videos, really great interactive materials that can be streamed, even materials with fantastic illustrations that can be downloaded and printed or put on a CD, and if you've got a printer, they can be printed off and used in the classroom. In English in Action, they're even using SIM cards so that the teachers can use their own mobile phones and they can play the lessons and the demonstrations through their mobile phones and a pair of speakers so that pronunciation can be addressed. So you can spend that money and produce a small set of really high-end resources, but those resources can be broadcast to thousands and thousands of people, or millions of people in the case of, for example, TES India. I saw their stand next door. TES India is doing exactly that. High investment, but shared across millions of people means that the unit cost per person is very low. So you can access or you can reach people and with mobile phones and with increasing internet penetration and even CDs and even print materials using block resource centers, etc. Put high resolution, high quality materials into the hands of everybody. So it's incredibly democratizing. And it's really exciting what English in Action is doing, what TES India is doing in India. These are the kind of things that show the potential of those opportunities. But it's not a replacement for face-to-face. It's a supplement. It complements, but it doesn't replace. So I think that's the other thing. When people talk about technology replacing, that has me really worried. We're still human beings. We still respond to human emotions and motivations.
Thank you, Colin. You can see that we are snowed by questions over here, and I was trying to read rapidly through all the questions, and it all comes back to asking the same question. But Amol, Lina, Colin, and Maya, how can we improve quality as well as respond to the need for quantity? So coming to a question where, because India has such fantastic, large numbers that sometimes it's difficult to keep track of the zeros at the end, in a sense. So to make it simple, if the government of India had 100 rupees to spend on improving the quality of teacher education, how would you say that money should be distributed? How much should it put towards digitalization? How much should it put towards pre-service, in-service, research? What would you say would be a response to some, if you were a strategist, you had this big problem, how would you address that?
Can I respond to that? I would say that if the Indian government sees education as a right, it should spend as much as it does on the Indian Army. If India establishes that education is our right, then it should spend as much or even more it spends on its national and international borders. And if we were to treat education as our right, then we will have to always work with quantity. Now the challenge is how do we also keep up to the quality of that quantity is something that we have to address, and I don't think there is a shortcut to that. We all have to work towards it, and I think it's a lifelong process. It's a matter of culture and discipline.
Yeah, that's a very interesting and very optimistic suggestion. But the critical question, as Rittika asked, how does Army spend its budget? What portion goes on what? How much on training, how much on development, how much on resources, etc. I think that was the question. So whether we get as much money as Army gets, my personal suggestion would be 20% of that 100 rupees to teachers' institutions, so as to cover whatever they have to do for teachers' development. 20% to teachers themselves, because there are lots of things teachers want to do on their own. Of course, not as a free gift, but they have to deserve to get that amount. And 20% for teachers' resource provisions. For example, libraries and labs and technology and etc. And the remaining 40% to teacher education institutions, assuming that those teacher education institutions are taking care of both pre-service as well as in-service teacher education and development. That will be my way of looking at it. And I look forward to the day when I may not become the finance minister, but at least the finance minister will listen to me.
I think on the budget, Eve, this is a good discussion to have.
I'm just going back to Rittika's question about 100 rupees because the Indian Army's budget is just too huge for me to wrap my mind around. So, though I do understand what Lina was saying, I completely agree with her that we need to be spending more money on education than on defense. However, let's look at the 100 rupees. If I were to look at, if we had to get 100 rupees per teacher, I would say I would spend at least 50% actually and honestly from my own experience of working with teachers, on helping the teacher feel good about himself or herself. I think there's a huge deficit in terms of self-esteem and sense of self-worth. And that is what is actually preventing him or her from seeking out professional growth and development and so on. So helping him or her feel good about himself, his or her role as a teacher, and then to look at and begin to start questioning what's happening in their environment, in their school environment, in their work environment, etc. So I think 50% would go into that. I think the remaining, I would break it up into specific need-based professional development opportunities depending on what the teacher wants. So in other words, because 50% you need to spend on helping the teacher recognize that he or she has a voice and can do something. Then the remaining 50% let the teacher decide what he or she wants to spend it on.
Okay, so if I was portioning out my 100 rupees or my whatever crore rupees, I think the first thing I'd send it on would be quality assurance. I think there's a real challenge in many systems to turn teaching from an occupation into a profession. And I think that chimes with what Maya said, that until you have real standards, then you have, you devalue the teaching as a profession. And I think that is a really important aspect, and I would do that not just by working with, I think that's really important to work with teacher unions. Often in these debates, teacher unions, it's only about teacher training institutions and the National Centre of Teacher Education and so forth. Teacher unions are really important. The second thing I would spend it on would be on pre-service. I'd spend around 20% of that on pre-service, and I would do that because, firstly, I don't know if many people know, but India's population is slowing, and in some cases, and certainly in the southern states, populations are falling. So the need for teachers is going to be declining, and certainly already in some states like Kerala, there are schools closing down, so there are surplus teachers within the system. I'd also focus on maths, science, and language teachers in that, because while commonly people talk about teacher shortages, it's actually not a teacher shortage, because there are many teachers who are unemployed in India. There is a shortage in specific subject areas, so I would focus the money where the shortages are. The third point would be on in-service, and in-service, often I would really harness the power of ICT, because I've seen what it can do in Bangladesh. And the fourth thing is completely separate from the normal debate around teacher education, but I would invest 25%, a quarter of the money, on school leadership, because I think change comes from in schools, and good school leaders are the start of good schooling. And instructional leadership is where there is a real opportunity to have instructional leadership every day, every hour in the school, rather than courses once every summer or once every year. So I really believe very strongly in CPD happening not just in school, because clearly teacher education institutions are important, but much more of a teamwork approach to continual professional development.
Okay. So I'd like to, if you look at the number of questions I have, I'm completely certain that we've received one question from nearly everyone in the audience over here. So thank you very much for your enthusiasm in asking us the question. But the interesting thing is that the panel, I think, has really done a sterling job in answering a very difficult question through their apportioning of the 100 rupees, which seems to have covered many of the aspects that bring together the quality and quantity aspects of it. So before they leave us, we have a set of little token of appreciation for being here. Some giveaways, a memento for them to take away to remember this hour that we spent together discussing such an important issue. And thank you to all of you for your enthusiasm. I'm sure the organization will come back to you.
Right, thank you very much to our distinguished panel for helping us all to develop the quality bug. Thank you very much. Now, we've got a very short session now before a brief break, so I'm not going to say much, but I'm just going to introduce Tim Phillips, who works with the British Council in Manchester and he's asked me to stress that he prefers poetry to football, and he loves the literary side of Manchester. So I'm going to ask Tim Phillips to come on the stage to talk to us about the CPD Framework Global. So can we give a warm welcome to Tim? Thank you.
Oops. Okay. So, hello, can you hear me? Yes? Oops, sorry. Let me just take my presentation back. Okay, so I've got a short time, only about 10 minutes, just to give a quick update on the CPD framework that was launched at TEC15 last year, and about how we're going global with it. And as I've mentioned that I like poetry, I thought possibly I ought to prove that by reading you a little poem about what we're doing. In India, they developed a framework which everyone thought could be great work. So we worked on it more until we were sure that we could offer the world a fine framework. Thank you. If you want to nominate me to be the next Poet Laureate in Britain, I'll accept your nominations. Last year it was launched, and this was what you saw, I think. We had the framework diagram and 9 professional behaviours. And during this year, what we've been doing is looking at how we can take this forward and make this a global framework. So we've been doing a lot of work. We've been consulting with colleagues, getting feedback, discussing with experts. And so we've taken this forward, we've made some adjustments, and we're at the end of what I would say is the first stage of our development. We're near the end of that, and there will be much more information coming out from the spring in terms of the global offer. So, where have we got to? So, we've been working with the diagram, and we've come up with this. It's like a C for continuing professional development, with the professional practices all around the outside, and arrows which you can use to assess yourself. And in the centre is quality in the classroom. And you'll see that, in fact, we've expanded the number of professional practices. We've got 3 new ones. One is managing resources, one is promoting 21st century skills, and one is understanding educational policies and practice. And why have we done that? Well, one of the things that we're aiming at is to make this framework relevant to teachers of all subjects, and to meet the various agendas that we meet in our work across the globe. So 21st century skills is often a consideration for education systems, and teachers want to help their learners to develop these skills in more detail. So to support them, educational policies and practice, well, it's clear that the context for teaching and learning is very important, and we want to be able to reflect that. So we've expanded that, and we've also worked in more detail on defining and just describing what each of these professional practices involves. So here's an example: promoting 21st century skills, what we think as the British Council are the key things, and this forms a syllabus, in effect, for for the knowledge and the skills that a teacher needs to know. And on this we can base training resources, we can provide other resources related to helping teachers understand this. we can provide the networks that they need to meet other teachers who have a good understanding of this. And we encourage reflection and evaluation. So, to summarise, we've got 12 professional practices, and we've got stages of the development, similar to the ones that you were shown last year. So stages of development in each of these practices. So where do you think as a teacher you feel you are in terms of your knowledge and skills in the different areas? So why? Why are we doing this? Well, I've got a quotation here, and I think it reflects a lot of some of the discussions we've heard today, some of the presentations. Learning depends first and foremost on the quality of the teacher. So if that's important, then we want to support that. And we want to support ministries and other organisations in improving the quality of teaching in all subjects. And we also want to support teachers themselves in taking responsibility for their own professional development. So what we want to do through this framework is to try and make clear what we can offer and what other offers we can bring into this, and to make it clear what pathways and how everything fits together in terms of how we can support this. We want to be flexible, we want to be comprehensive, and we want to support individuals as well. So, learning more. Well, one thing you can do to learn more is go to the British Council stand, because we have a series of articles on each of these 12 professional practices, which you can take away, and this gives you practical ideas and thinking points around aspects of these different professional practices. So there's a direct practical thing that you can take away. What next? Well, we're looking at developing this so that we've got a comprehensive, practice-based and detailed offer, which includes the framework, and we're looking at implementing this during this year. That includes comprehensive, practice-based and detailed resources, both training and other professional development resources, evaluation tools for teachers to self-evaluate and to help measure what teachers know, to encourage research. So we know that there's a lot of learning still to be done in these areas, so we want to work with partners and we want to encourage research, and also to map, because we recognise there are a number of frameworks around the world in individual countries, ministries, other organisations have frameworks, so to map and try to see how everything can fit together and recognise the richness of the offer. We recognise that there are other frameworks that are necessary, so we're working on a teacher-educators framework so that we can encourage an understanding of what that teacher education requires and how to develop teacher educators, and also at another stage to look at school leadership and how we can provide a framework to support that. That's a very quick summary. There's a lot to say, and John Shackleton and I will be talking a little bit more tomorrow at 10:15 here about frameworks, about the work we're doing, and to give you a bit more insight into what we're doing in a very complex, fascinating, global project that we hope will bring benefits for all of us. Thank you very much.
That was elegant, poetic, and brief. Thank you so much, Tim. We all appreciated that. Now, this is the moment of when you have to be decisive, remember? Yes? You've got to make that difficult choice. So I invite you now to make that choice. Either stay in the room for the next session or go to another room where there are all sorts of other things going on. But it's a time to be decisive and quick. Okay, thank you. Where's it gone? And if you are going to stay, because this is an interactive workshop, could you move forward, please? If you want to stay in the room, could you move forward to the front of the room? Thank you very much.